Is this some kind of joke? The lieutenant's voice cut through the air, sharp and dripping with the arrogance that comes from youth in a brand new rank. His words echoed across the vast, climate-controlled drone hangar. He stood with hands planted firmly on his hips, his crisp uniform still holding the factory creases. His glare was locked on the old man before him, a frail figure swallowed by his red janitor's coveralls. Do you even know where you are, old man? Ralph Jennings, 82 years since his first breath, didn't respond. He simply leaned against his wheeled trash bin, his gnarled fingers gripping the plastic rim. His faded blue eyes weren't on the young officer, but on the sleek, silent Predator drone, resting like a sleeping beast in the middle of the hangar. He'd seen machines like that before, messier, louder, flown by boys whose hands trembled with fear. This one was different, a ghostly hunter, silent and purposeful. Ralph understood its function, with a clarity that would have unnerved the lieutenant. The young officer traded a weary, practiced glance with the two airmen at his sides, their faces balanced between discomfort and forced neutrality. They were following a script. Check ID, enforce the perimeter. The lieutenant's patience snapped, get away from the asset. Now. His voice was a whip crack, meant to startle and command. He stepped closer and, with an almost theatrical ease, rested a hand on the grip of his holstered sidearm, an empty display of power in a place that housed far deadlier force. Ralph's gaze drifted from the drone, past the uneasy airman, and finally to the lieutenant. He didn't flinch or answer, he simply watched, his stillness a calm counterpoint to the officer's agitation. The lieutenant saw only a frail, senile janitor who'd strayed into a restricted zone, a problem to be removed. He couldn't read the decades of discipline that lived in Ralph's posture, the kind of quiet vigilance earned in places the lieutenant had never been. He mistook that steadiness for vacancy and raised his voice. Are you deaf? I'm placing you under temporary detention for breaching a secure perimeter. Hands where I can see them. The airmen shifted, uneasy. They'd known Ralph for years, a fixture as regular as sunrise. A quiet man who kept to himself and cleaned with slow, precise care. This didn't feel right to them. The lieutenant, however, doubled down, riding the current of his authority. Hands where I can see them. He barked again, louder, taking another step and allowing his shout to carry across the polished concrete. What had started as a misplaced tool bag had escalated quickly. Ralph had been finishing his nightly sweep when he noticed a maintenance kit lying dangerously close to the MQ-9 Reaper's intake. He knew what foreign object debris could do to a turbine, so he padded over in battered work boots, bent with a small grunt, and picked up the bag to place it on the designated bench. When the lieutenant rounded the drone's tail, he didn't see a cautious employee averting disaster, he saw an unauthorized person touching military hardware. Questions became accusations. Who are you? What are you doing here? What's your clearance? Ralph tried to explain in his rasping, quiet voice, but the lieutenant wasn't listening. He was asserting dominance. He snatched Ralph's laminated facility ID from the coveralls and sneered at the title. Contract Sanitation. As if the job's low status confirmed his suspicions. How could a man like this have access to one of the planet's most advanced weapons? A small crowd gathered at a respectful distance, mechanics and avionics techs drawn by the shouting, watching with worried faces. They knew Ralph, his polite nods, the way he sometimes paused to study the drones, the faint trail of industrial cleaner and old coffee that followed him. He was part of the hangar's ecosystem, a ghost in gray who cleaned up without complaint. Emboldened by his audience, the lieutenant puffed up, enjoying the humiliation he was inflicting, a performance to soothe his own insecurities. He jabbed a finger at a tarnished metal pin on Ralph's collar. What's this? Some museum trinket. He mocked, chuckling harshly. This is a military installation, Grandpa. We deal in real honors here, not cheap souvenirs. Then he motioned to an airman. Get ready to escort him to the security office. Run a full background check. I want to know everything about this man. The airman hesitated, eyes flicking to Ralph for a heartbeat. Then, prodded by the lieutenant, moved reluctantly. The circle tightened. When the lieutenant's finger touched the worn pin, Ralph's world wavered. The hangar's sterile lights dissolved into a searing, dusty sun. The drone's low hum became the roar of a Huey lifting off a cratered landing zone. The smell of ozone and jet fuel gave way to the coppery temps of blood and choking dust. For an instant, he was elsewhere, a younger hand pinning that same metal to a sweat-soaked uniform. A commander's gravelly voice telling him, you don't just get one of these. You earn it with blood. Don't forget what it cost. The memory struck like lightning and was gone, and the hangar snapped back into place. The lieutenant continued, sneer-fixed, oblivious to the veteran he'd provoked. Ralph's face didn't change, but a dim ember of an old fire glowed again in his faded blue eyes. Across the hangar, leaning against a giant yellow tool chest, Master Sergeant Cole watched with growing dread. He'd seen his share of arrogant lieutenants and understood the unspoken hierarchies that mattered more than collar insignia. He always made a point to greet Ralph in the mornings. There was a profound stillness about the janitor that Cole recognized, the same calm he'd seen in a few operators. During his time in the Special Forces, the sort of composure born of having walked through hell and survived. The lieutenant's public humiliation broke an unwritten code. When the officer mocked the pin, Cole had seen enough. He pushed off the tool chest and melted into the shadows at the edge of the hangar, pulling out his personal cell phone. Without following the chain of command, he dialed Colonel Matthews, a contact reserved for a select few. It was a protocol breach, but his instincts, honed over 25 years, screamed that this wasn't a routine security matter. The phone rang once, twice, then the colonel answered, voice curt. This better be important, Master Sergeant. Cole kept his voice low and steady, careful that no one nearby could overhear. Sir, Cole said quietly into the phone. You need to get down to Hangar 4. Now, there was a pause. What is it, Cole? Came Colonel Matthews's clipped reply. It's Lieutenant Miller, sir. He's detaining one of the contract janitors, a janitor. The colonel's voice was thick with irritation. And you're calling my personal cell for that? Sir, Cole continued carefully. The janitor's name is Ralph Jennings. The colonel froze. He was seated in his spacious office, walls lined with commendations and framed photos beside grim-faced generals, surrounded by the quiet hum of bureaucratic order. Moments earlier, he'd been immersed in logistics reports, fuel requisitions, sortie schedules, supply chains, until that name sliced through the noise like a sniper's shot. For a long moment, Colonel Matthews said nothing. The name echoed in the silence of the room, a name he hadn't heard aloud in over a decade, a name tied to classified after-action reports and whispered, legends known only to those with the highest clearance. Say that name again, Master Sergeant, he commanded, his tone suddenly stripped of irritation. Ralph Jennings, sir, Cole repeated. He's an old man now, works as a janitor here. A cold weight settled in the colonel's chest. He moved quickly, striding to his desk, eyes scanning the row of secure phones. How had this happened? How had a man like him been left to live in quiet obscurity, pushing a mop? How had the system failed so completely to recognize one of its own legends? Keep him there, Cole, the colonel ordered, his voice now a deep, urgent growl. Do not, under any circumstances, let that lieutenant take him anywhere. Am I clear? Crystal, sir, Cole replied. The line went dead. Colonel Matthews slammed the receiver down and shouted for his aide. Get my car and the honor guard. Full-dress uniform. Now move. The young captain rushed in, startled by the sudden eruption of authority. He had never seen the colonel like this, eyes blazing, energy electric. It felt as if the entire base had just gone to high alert. Sir, what's the occasion? The aide stammered the occasion. Captain, the colonel replied, buttoning his service jacket with grim resolve, is that we have a living legend in our hangar, and we've been letting him clean our toilets. Back in Hangar 4, Lieutenant Miller's arrogance had reached its breaking point. Ralph's silence, his refusal to flinch, argue, or obey, had only deepened the lieutenant's fury. To him, it was insolence, an old man's quiet defiance that needed to be crushed. That's it. I'm done with this, Miller snapped, yanking a pair of zip ties from his belt. You are being detained as a potential security threat. Your refusal to cooperate will be noted in my report. He gestured sharply to the airman. Escort him. If he resists, use necessary force. The two airmen exchanged a nervous glance. Use force on an 82-year-old janitor. It was absurd, but orders were orders. One of them took a hesitant step forward. Miller smirked, convinced of his authority, savoring his moment of control. This, he believed, was leadership, enforcing discipline, proving vigilance, making an example. He had no idea that this moment would not elevate his career but destroy it. Soon, his name would become a whispered cautionary tale about arrogance and ignorance in uniform. Just as an airman reached toward Ralph's arm, the ground began to tremble. A deep, resonant rumble filled the hangar, not the whine of a jet engine, but the growl of multiple engines approaching fast. The massive bay doors of Hangar 4 began to slide open with a thunderous metallic groan, flooding the interior with blinding afternoon light. Silhouetted against it was a convoy of black official vehicles, flags fluttering on the lead staff car. Tires screeched as they came to an abrupt halt on the tarmac. Doors burst open before the wheels stopped spinning. Colonel Matthews emerged first, his expression dark and stormy. Behind him came the command chief, Master Sergeant, and a full 14-man honor guard, their dress blues immaculate, their white gloves gleaming under the harsh light. The hangar fell into absolute silence. Mechanics froze mid-task, wrenches suspended. Airmen stood rigid, the weight of authority pressing down like gravity itself. The lieutenant's face drained of color. This wasn't a response. It was a statement, a show of power, respect, and history that transformed the ordinary hangar into a cathedral of honor. Colonel Matthews strode forward, each step echoing like a drumbeat. He didn't glance at the stunned onlookers or the trembling lieutenant. His focus was solely on the old man in the red coveralls. He stopped exactly 3 feet from Ralph Jennings. For a long moment, he simply looked at him, disbelief, reverence, and regret etched into his features. Then, in a motion sharp and deliberate, he snapped to attention and delivered a perfect salute. It wasn't casual or polite. It was reverent, the kind of salute reserved for heads of state or Medal of Honor recipients. "Mr. Jennings," Colonel Matthews said, his voice booming through the hangar, trembling with emotion none of them had ever heard before. "It is an honor, sir." The lieutenant's jaw went slack. The airman stared, speechless. The colonel turned, addressing the stunned personnel. "For those of you who do not know," he began, his voice echoing through the vast space, "you are in the presence of Chief Master Sergeant Ralph Jennings, retired, one of the founding members of the Air Force Pararescue Service, a pioneer of combat search and rescue. During his 26 years of service, he flew over 100 combat missions, from the jungles of Vietnam to the mountains of Afghanistan." He paused. Letting the weight of his words fill the air like sacred scripture, he turned his gaze toward the lieutenant, eyes narrowing with purpose. "That cheap trinket on his collar, Lieutenant," the colonel said, voice sharp and deliberate, "is the Air Force Cross, our nation's second highest award for valor in combat. He earned it during the Sun Tay raid, a mission so classified most of you have never even heard of it." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. In an instant, the man they had dismissed as a janitor became something entirely different, a living legend, a fragment of history quietly sweeping floors among them. The colonel's full attention shifted to the young officer. The lieutenant's earlier arrogance drained from his face, replaced by an ashen dread. "Lieutenant Miller," the colonel began, his tone now a low, dangerous growl, far more unsettling than his earlier rage. "You stand here in a hangar that houses the pinnacle of modern air power. Yet you failed to recognize the man who wrote the book on rescuing pilots from behind enemy lines. You, who have never heard a shot fired in anger, chose to publicly disgrace a man with more courage in his little finger than you'll muster in your entire life." Miller opened his mouth to defend himself, but the colonel silenced him with a cutting gesture. "You are a disgrace to that uniform, to your rank, and to every airman on this base. Your arrogance is a stain on my command." Each word hit like a physical blow. The lieutenant wilted under the verbal assault, his pride stripped away, leaving only a frightened young man in a uniform, far too big for him, just as the colonel seemed ready to end the young officer's career on the spot. A calm voice broke the tension. "That's enough, Colonel." All eyes turned to Ralph. He had straightened, no longer leaning on his trash bin. His voice carried quiet authority, steady, measured, and free of resentment. "The boy made a mistake," Ralph said softly. "He was doing his job, just a little too proud while doing it." He looked directly at Lieutenant Miller. His faded blue eyes, full of years and wisdom, held no anger. "Son," he said gently, "the most important thing you can wear with that uniform isn't your rank, it's humility. Never forget that." The simplicity of the words struck harder than any reprimand could, and as Ralph spoke, his mind drifted back to a muddy field half a world away. He was on his knees. Rain and gunfire all around. A young pilot lay bleeding beside him, legs shattered, life slipping away. Ralph had shielded him with his own body, hands working frantically to stop the bleeding. Then, amidst the chaos, his commander, Major Evans, was hit in his final moments. Evans had unclipped the pin from his collar, the very one the lieutenant had mocked, and pressed it into Ralph's hand. "You're the bravest man I've ever known, Ralph," he'd gasped. "Wear it for the boys we couldn't bring home." That pin wasn't an official award, it was something far deeper, a passing of honor from a dying man to one who had earned it through selfless courage. The official Air Force Cross came later, quietly, but the small, tarnished pin, that was the one that truly mattered. It wasn't a symbol of glory, it was a reminder of sacrifice. The aftermath of what came to be known as the incident in Hangar 4 was swift. Lieutenant Miller received a formal reprimand and was reassigned to a remote Arctic logistics base, far from opportunities to flaunt his authority. Before his transfer, Colonel Matthews required him to attend a personal history briefing with the base historian, a deep dive into the Sun Tay raid and the roots of Air Force Special Warfare. The colonel also launched a new program, Valor in Our Midst. Its goal, to recognize and honor the many veterans working quietly in civilian roles on base. Their stories began appearing in newsletters, at commander calls, and across bulletin boards, constant reminders of the quiet heroism that existed among them every day. About a month later, in a small grocery store, a subdued and humbled former lieutenant reached for a carton of milk and froze. In the next aisle, comparing 2 cans of soup, stood Ralph Jennings. For a brief moment, Miller thought about walking away, but then he remembered Ralph's words, humility. He approached slowly. "Mr. Jennings," he said, voice trembling, I wanted to apologize for my behavior. There's no excuse." Ralph studied him for a long, silent moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted, son," he said simply, turning back to his soup. "Just remember the lesson." That quiet forgiveness hit harder than punishment ever could, both a release and a responsibility. Ralph went home that day without fanfare, his final act of grace unnoticed by the world. A lesson left behind by a man whose greatness wasn't defined by medals or titles, but by the humility, courage, and compassion that had always guided him. Thank you for joining us for this story on Veterans' Valor. If you were moved by the quiet heroism of Ralph Jennings, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of the unsung heroes who walk among us every day.